Hey brewers, welcome to Iconoclast Brewing. Today I'm going to show you what a brewery looks like after you've been brewing for more than a decade. Spoiler alert, the upgrades never stop. So this is what you would see if you're walking by my house. And if the garage is open, the brewery is open. So let's go inside. This space has been totally overhauled several times, and most recently I picked up this bar top made from decking and pallet. The chairs are awesome because they swivel and they sort of have backs to them. So if you're sitting at my bar, you'd see the tap list on that TV up there, which is off right now. The taps, of course, and really the whole brewery. So you'd probably notice some of the decorations around here. I like to keep all my medals and my awards on this shelf that we made over in the corner. But then my wife made me all these cool brewery signs and all these band signs that we pretty much hung all over the wall. There's a lot more that aren't up yet. And if you want one made for your brewery, you can let me know and I'll hook you up. Okay, so this was a super cheap hack for a $120 mill. I built the stand initially with no hopper, but when I started running 18-gallon batches for club brew days, I really needed more capacity. I had an old water jug lying around, so I cut it up and built a bracket for it. And I can get about 20 pounds of grain in there at once. The drill I use is from Harbor Freight. It is a high torque mixing drill, which is perfect for turning the mill, and costs around 40 bucks. So I'll usually just prop the drill up on a second bucket so it can't spin around, zip tie the trigger and walk away. It's great. So you guys mostly know that I use a Grainfather G70, which lets me brew as much as 18-gallon batches and as little as 6-gallon batches. I now use my G30 for sparge heating, and because it has a pump built in, it transfers sparge water super easy, and I can do that all from my phone or my tablet. So I get to have what is basically a pro-level control system for everything with a repurposed, inexpensive 10-inch fire tablet. I also use a tilt hydrometer that this tablet connects to and automatically updates Brewfather every 15 minutes or so with gravity and temperature readings. I do like the G70 a lot. The only downside so far has been that because of the center location of the pump inlet, any air pockets created by boiling means that the pump will experience cavitation and it can't start to flow. So you have to wait for the temperature to drop to about 200 degrees before recirculating and sanitizing your chiller. It's not a deal breaker, but it is something to keep in mind. So the G70 rides on this stand I made by repurposing my old G30 stand, and it makes it super easy to wheel around for sparging, transferring, and even cleaning in place. I have a bunch of hooks and storage built in for things like my gloves and even my mash paddle, along with its own drip tray, which was 3D printed, by the way. I keep the massive G70 chiller up here, so it's totally out of the way. I keep the tubing tucked up under these boards and I pull them down whenever I need them. Or I just let them hang down if I need the chiller to drip dry after cleaning. So if you look up, you'll see that I keep my grain sleeve winched up to the ceiling. And yes, I used a Harbor Freight winch to lift the basket because with 25 pounds of grain plus the water, it gets pretty heavy. I plan to attach this winch to a rail in the future so I could have more flexibility and need to roll the G70 around less. Now let's talk about my steam condenser. This thing I am really excited to use. I'm supposed to be able to get down to about a half gallon of boil off with this setup and use around 30 to 50% of the power to get to a boil. So there's really big energy savings there. I've not broken it in yet, and that's mainly because my brews lately have been really high stakes or experimental. So I need to plan a blonde Kvike brew or something simple like that to test it out and lock in my numbers. The lid is actually the G70 distillation lid, which I drilled out for a sight glass that I bought on Amazon, and the center 4-inch tri-clamp port connects to a reducer, which then goes to the Brewzilla condenser pipework. The way it works is pretty simple, and it's actually kind of genius. The steam flows up through this pipe here, and it comes into contact with the pipe on the other end, which has a trickle of cold water flowing through it. And that causes the steam to condense back into water. And then it drips through the silicone hose in the bottom into a 6.5 gallon bucket. And you just dispose of that wastewater. So over here in the corner is a sink, and it's easily one of the best additions to the brewery. This is a wash tub style sink that I attached a commercial sprayer to. And it's not so bad for a $40 sink. It's just large enough for me to wash out the G70 grain sleeve, but in the future I really want to install a 3-bay sink for Cicerone level protocols. So 1 bay for cleaning, 1 for rinsing, and then 1 for sanitizing. I also have this food grade hose hooked up over here for all sorts of things like spraying down the floor and hitting my fermenters with some hot water, making cleaning pretty easy. And possibly my favorite feature of this sink is the glass rinser I added. It does a great job, and friends who also have glass rinsers have told me it performs better than most. I'll have links to all this stuff in the description, of course. So when we put it in the sink, we realized, hey, we're gonna need some sort of protection from moisture in the brewery. So we came up with the idea to use vinyl contact paper, which you can see on the wall behind me. We haven't had any issues with water whatsoever, even though I boil at full blast in this room. All right, so you see behind me these spike fermenters, and you're probably pretty excited to hear about them. So they're pretty much my pride and joy in the brewery. And so these are actually spike CF10 fermenters. You can see on the back wall, I have a ton of tri-clamps and fittings that I use for mainly cold side work. This collection really kicked off when I picked up the first spike CF10 and a Blickman Riptide with TC fittings. So all three of the CF10s came with a ton of accessories like a sample valve, spunning valves, PRVs, carbonation stones, sip balls, a hot bong, temperature control packages, and one even came with leg extensions. And a sight glass. The sight glass is something I want to get for all of these because it's really made it easy to see when yeast is dropping out and when I'm good to start packaging. I would highly recommend going with the wider shelf you see on the other two CF10s because they are far more stable than the one on the left. I could easily see this taller one tipping over. It's just not as wide. You'll see the casters for the wider ones are mounted on the far edges of the triangle at the bottom. And if I ran over a power cable with that really tall, thin one, I could definitely see it tipping. They're really easy to clean and in general have made my cold side practices much easier. So I actually have two Glycol Chillers in here, and one is the Franken cooler, and that is a DIY build with an air conditioner that my friend made. I'm sure I could get a billion pumps in there, but the thing is massive. So I ended up picking up on the cheap a Penguin spike chiller. And this looks like it can get probably about 3 pumps in there, which is enough for my setup. One good thing I can say about the DIY chillers is that they only need to chill the glycol every few hours or so because you have such a big reservoir of 15, 20 gallons. With a Spike, Penguin, that type of chiller, you generally have a smaller reservoir, so it's gonna have to chill the glycol more often. So speaking of the Riptide pump, here it is. And it's an awesome pump because the whole thing can be disassembled and cleaned, and you can also replace all the parts. It has a bleed valve, which is awesome for when you get some air in the pump. I use this mainly for sip process. I'll add a half gallon of water with a scoop of alkaline brewery wash into the fermenter, connect the pump to the dump port, and then the other end to the sip ball, and just let it do its thing. I then pump the cleaner into the sink, spray out and rinse the fermenter, run that water through the pump to clear out any residual cleaner, and then I run clean water through the sip ball, and I'll let that recirculate for about 15 minutes to make sure everything's rinsed. The final step is pumping out the clean rinsing water. I leave my valves open to prevent mold as well. You've probably noticed I have a lot of alkaline brewery wash, which I think I've mentioned in like every video so far. And I don't have any sort of relationship with Craftmeister. I just really like this product. That's why I bought a huge bucket of it. Okay, so you'll see over here on top of my old fermentation chamber, I have a couple Fermzillas. I actually have these two and then 2 more All Rounders. My wife made these neoprene jackets for the Fermzillas for super cheap, and if you want one, let me know. I like the Fermzillas with the collection jar, but they do have problems, like getting a good seal on the jar, and the jar getting stuck. They can easily crack if you turn them too hard. So I ended up moving to All Rounders, which are pretty much the same thing, but have a lower profile and no jars to worry about. Okay, so next, I mentioned I have carb stones for the Spike Conicals. These are not stones I used to carbonate with CO2, although that's not actually a bad idea. I actually use them to aerate with pure O2, pure oxygen, using one of those cheap red tanks from the hardware store. I keep a flow meter on my setup, and I run it at about 1 liter per minute for about 2 minutes on a 5-gallon batch. One of my favorite things I've picked up recently is this fan. It runs at a high output and it can dry the worst puddles in no time. I have no floor drain yet. This thing lets me spray down the floor and be dry in about 30 minutes. Again, another win for Harbor Freight. And speaking of Harbor Freight, I definitely have more of that stuff around. So one example is this roll around for brew day stuff like acid, your pH meter, any pumps, anything like that. And I stuck a paper towel dispenser on this. And I also have my gloves handy for when I'm actually using cleaner or acid to protect myself. And I keep my syringes in here for measuring things like acid. I highly recommend those syringes. And the other Harbor Freight buy here is this workbench. And it's pretty great. I'm not gonna show you the inside because it is far from organized, but I keep things like my bottle caps, my dual canister beer filter, and various parts in there. So, more storage. This is another Harbor Freight buy where I keep a ton of different small parts. It's really handy to have them all in plain sight and helps to keep things from getting lost. Next to that, I keep all my salts, my flavorings, some odds and ends like hydrometers, things like that on this rack. And these glass jars are from Amazon and have changed the feel of the brewery. It's a tiny addition to make for a lot of appeal. It really adds a professional vibe. A really cool addition I made recently was these small metal cups that I use for measuring and organizing my boil additions. So that could be your salts, hops, yeast nutrient, anything like that. They look really cool and they're gonna last a long time. So there's this other little piece of equipment over here that I almost skipped over, and that's a pressure canner. This is an electric pressure canner I got on Prime Day like 5 years ago, and I use it to can my own wort. So what I end up doing is making concentrated wort, just the same as a proper starter that you would buy in a can, except it's dirt cheap compared to that. Definitely a video to follow on how to do that, so stay tuned and subscribe. Okay, so for CO2, I actually have 3 tanks. 2 CO2, with one being 20 pound, the other 5 pound. And then a 5 pound nitrogen tank. The large CO2 tank is for serving, and you're gonna get to see that in a moment on the Kegerator. The smaller CO2 tank is for mobile work, so pressure transfers, that kind of thing. The nitro tank is for serving cold brew coffee on nitro. If you guys want a video on how to build a system like that, let me know. Okay, so this is my newest piece of hardware. After my 13 tap Kegerator went out on me, the condenser failed, and I had to find a replacement really quick. I found this thing at a discount restaurant store and brought it home the same day with the help of my buddy. Thanks, Nate. I outfitted it with 2 4-tap towers that are air-cooled, so no foamy lines, and I slapped my intertaps on there. Intertaps are amazing faucets. I've used everything from builder-grade cheapo faucets to Perlix, and I prefer these over everything else I've used. You can swap out the nozzles with different attachments like growler fillers, stout taps, all kinds of things. And Nuka Tap also makes a compatible counter pressure bottle filler that just slides right into the tap nozzle. It makes bottling really easy right off the keg. Okay, so we have 2 drip trays with drains on there, and it even has internal lighting, which I didn't know I was missing until I had it. I can fit 10 corny kegs in here, but I only use 8 lately, with the rest of the space going to the coffee keg and the nitro tank. There's definitely pros and cons to a front loading kegerator like this, just like there are pros and cons to a Kegerator that top loads. With this front load ability, you don't have to lift anything crazy, but you do have to take out all the kegs in front of the keg you need to get to. Whereas with a Kegerator, you're gonna have direct access to all the kegs, but you're gonna need to lift with your lower back at an awful angle. And if it's a full keg, that's gonna hurt. So I mainly have these older Pepsi style kegs, but I'm starting to migrate to Torpedo Kegs. I love these kegs. Take a look inside. You'll see that the bottom is tapered, so you're gonna be able to almost totally empty the keg before it kicks. It forces the liquid to the sides of the middle. It'll definitely let you empty that keg more so than the older kegs would allow. Plus, these look amazing. So yeah, that's a tour of Conical Brewing. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed making it, and don't forget to subscribe if you had fun. I'll see you in the next one, and never stop learning.